What's up, everybody? My name's Jordan. I'm here from Wednesday Night Warhammer, and it's a new year. It's a lot of things have changed in Warhammer since I have done my last Tyranid tier list. And one of those things that have changed is the channel's way bigger. um, and I kind of know a little bit more about how to do these things. So I wanted to take a second to kind of re-put my thoughts out there about a Tyranid tier list now that we're in the new year of 2025. Because a lot has shaken up since the last time I've done one of these, and I just wanted to put my thoughts out there in case you were interested in what I thought, which bug was the best, So how this tier list is going to work, we have S tier, which is pretty much every single list that you're going to make, pretty much regardless of the detachment, you're going to want to include this unit in some way. And that's how I'm going to do S tier, and then of course the best units will be further up in S tier, and then we'll have a ladder, of course, after that. A tier is going to be mildly detachment dependent, but still pretty much a core of your list will be A tier. You might not include all of these units, or they might be used in a different capacity depending on the detachment that you are in. But they are still very valuable units in the Tyranid Codex. So that's how I'm kind of listing A tier. B tier is going to be some of those units that are pretty much going to be leaning a little bit more towards detachment dependent. So you'll have some units who are very strong in specific detachments. And then you might have some units that are not so good all of the time, so that's kind of my thought process with B tier. Is going to be a little bit more detachment dependent than those S tier and A tier units. C tier is going to be units that maybe they're a fringe case that you use. Maybe if you're really excited about using them, you can bring them in for very specific reasons. I think you can bring those units. However, they're probably not a unit that we're going to be excited to use, every day in our play with Tyranids. D tier is dumpster tier, and I've already started us off pretty strong with 2 Hierodules. I love these Hierodules. They're legends, so we can't really play them. So unfortunately, that's where they are. They're in D tier. But amazing. Thank you for clicking on this video. Thank you for watching. We've had incredible growth here at Wednesday Night Warhammer. If you want to check out our live streams every Wednesday night, I highly encourage you to do so because they're pretty good and we have a lot of fun. But anyways, let's get into this tier list. And we're going to start first with Barbgaunts. Barbgaunts I was actually pretty high on at the beginning of the edition when Leviathan came out, when we only had Invasion Fleet. I think that you can do some funny stuff with sustained hits because you just get so many shots and then they slow people down as well. The problem is all they do is slow people down, and you're kind of like doing a balancing act of like, yes, they are 55 points, but however, I feel like Tyranids, there are so many good units in the Tyranid Codex that 55 points is honestly, you need 55 points. And unless you have a very specific reason to run Barbgaunts, I'm not going to be super excited about using them. And this might change, but of course, because of those reasons, I think they're either going to be bottom of B tier or top of C tier. And I think for right now, I'm going to put them top of C tier for Barbgaunts right there. Please don't put you point your barb launchers at me. That's just where I think. I think they're top of C tier for right now. Biovore. Biovore is going straight to S tier. Whether or not it's going to be the top of S tier, I think it is probably going to stay pretty close to the top of S tier for the duration of this video. We will see. They're just very good. And some people were worried about Spore Mines no longer scoring secondaries. They still score engage on all fronts, and they still score behind enemy lines. And besides that, they do a whole bunch of things. You can screen out your own field. You can screen out different areas of the battlefield. You turn off advancing for your opponent. they're just very, very good. I've been playing Assimilation Swarm a little bit recently. You can do some really cool tricks with Spore Mines that are just phenomenal in Assimilation Swarm as well. So I really think a Biovore is one of those units that the more you play it, the better you get at it and recognize how strong a Biovore is. So for right now, I think the Biovore 100% goes top of S tier for sure. Broodlord. I think the Broodlord is good. However, when I'm rating the Broodlord, I rate the Broodlord when he's attached to the Genestealers as well. So I might actually just put both of these units together because I'm not personally taking Broodlord without Genestealers. I know some people take like a 5-man Genestealer skirmish unit, and that does pretty well for them just to kind of like, I guess, scout up and then take out some scouts or something like that. But I personally have only done the 10-man Genestealer unit, and I've had some really, really good success with a Broodlord with a 10-man Genestealer unit. I think that unit is very powerful. Pretty much in any detachment that I would want to run that, if it can slot in the 230 points and kind of have this missile unit that goes out and takes care of things, I'm pretty excited to run Broodlord and Genestealers. So for right now, I'm going to put it top of A tier, and I actually am going to group the Genestealers with it. I know some people do the 5-man Genestealers that I talked about before, but for me, honestly, I'm just going to group them together right here because most of the time I just am always running Genestealers with the Broodlord because they kind of go very well together. The devastating wounds, and then honestly, the Genestealers help the Broodlord out as well because if the Genestealers are attached, then the Broodlord gets to reroll 1s to hit, which is pretty sweet. So pretty much you're re-rolling everything to hit and everything to wound. So it's a good time with the Broodlord and Genestealers. Top of A tier. Top of A tier for right now. All right, Carnifex. And this is of just any variety, I believe. We're going to talk about Old One Eye in a minute. However, Carnifex by himself is actually kind of okay in Crusher Stampede, and here's like when I was talking about at the beginning of they might be good in a detachment, but maybe not so good in other detachments for according to their ranking. A couple of just single Carnifexes running at your opponent in Crusher Stampede can be pretty spooky because as soon as they're endangered at all or shot at all, one, they get the Blood Surge, which is pretty sweet. That's pretty cool. And then 2, they get +1 to hit. So your Carnifex is like hitting on 3s, and it's a good time, I don't know why a bubble just showed up. Thanks, OBS. Anyways, because of that, I do think Carnifexes are better than Barbgaunts, and I don't think it's like by a whole lot, but I do think Carnifexes are a little bit better than Barbgaunts. So to be specific, the Carnifex by itself, without Old One Eye, I think is going to be top of C tier for right now. I think it is okay, but for 115 points, I don't know, that's pretty good. Okay, let's put him bottom of B tier. And if you're saying, but Jordan, that's also top of B tier. No, they're bottom of B tier. Okay, awesome. Next up, we have Deathleaper. Now, Deathleaper is a character that I feel like a lot of other armies would just absolutely love to have. And I think Tyranids like Deathleaper too. He does some cool stuff with the Battle Shock triggering and just being blown up and fight first. The only problem is we also have Lictors in our army. So you get to the point where like, is the extra 20 points worth the 4-up invulnerable save and the Battle Shock thing? And I think the answer is sometimes. I think sometimes the Deathleaper is cool, and if you really, really do want to bring him, I think he excels in Vanguard Onslaught. He can help you get off some really, opportune surprise assaults in order to get that +1 to wound off, or in Synaptic Nexus, triggering Battle Shocks in order to stack with that Synapse, the grenade strat from Synaptic Nexus. I think he's pretty cool too. A lot of people in our community here at WW really like him in Synaptic Nexus. So, I think he's pretty cool too. So unlike the Carnifexes, I'm going to put the Deathleaper top of B tier for right now. And it's kind of weird. It's the contingent that if in any other army that didn't have access to such good lone ops like Tyranids, like the Lictor, this guy is probably an immediate A tier. And then depending on the meta, he might push himself up to S tier. So I don't know. I might end up bumping Deathleaper up to A tier instead of being in this top B slot. But just because, and we'll talk about it later, just because I rate Lictors so high, I think Deathleaper actually gets bumped down a little bit. But yeah, we'll see. Exocrine. Now, Exocrine was very good before the June update. And then after the June update, Exocrine got way better. Strength 9 is just phenomenal. Strength 9 is actually a really good breaking point. Specifically because of those light vehicles, the transports like rhinos, and then I think some of the boats in Drukhari and Eldar are T9 as well. It really helps Tyranids out, because there was one of the things that Tyranids kind of struggle with is not being able to pop transports. So if you have an additional gun that is able to pop transports and allow for all of your other bugs to go in and eat the stuff that's inside, that's a pretty good thing to have in your army. For me, Exocrines are so efficient. 135 points. GW, please don't listen to this. They're so efficient. Their gun is so good, and they help the rest of your Tyranid army do its thing after you shoot, that they're S tier. I think Exocrines are pretty much the S tier damaging unit in the Tyranid Codex, for sure. So he's just going right up there next to Biovore, which is kind of funny that I'm saying that, because oftentimes for these tier rankings, I often rank the scoring units much higher than the damaging units. So Exocrine is very, very good. That's what I'm trying to say. He's incredible. He does a great job. However, Gargoyles, like I was just saying about scoring units, Gargoyles are going to be S tier as well. And remember, for the tier ranking that we're going to have, S tier, you're pretty much going to want to have these units in any list, in any detachment that you have. I've been playing a little bit of Assimilation Swarm, and I've been working on fine-tuning my Assimilation Swarm list. And I actually started with 2 Exocrines in it. And then I thought about it a bunch, and I was like, no, I need to just have 3 Exocrines. And as soon as I put 3 Exocrines into Assimilation Swarm, I thought all of my bugs that were, like cramming up the center could do their job way better, because I had the fire support of 3 Exocrines behind them. And it really kind of deters your opponents from initiating any trades that they shouldn't be doing, So it does really help that out. So if you haven't tried 3 Exocrines, and I hate to be the guy to be like, oh, this is the best unit, run 3 of them. If you haven't tried 3 Exocrines, you could try 3 Exocrines. They're very good. But anyways, we're supposed to be talking about Gargoyles here. Gargoyles are phenomenal. They're OC2. They're 85 points, which is getting to the point where they are a little bit expensive. They shoot and scoot. They advance and shoot. So you can move upwards to 24 inches. And I've done that many a time. And just take an objective. I did a whole video on like a spotlight on Gargoyles and all the things that you can do. I highly recommend you check that out if you are a Gargoyle hater. We do have some people, some Gargoyle haters, and that's okay. But I really do think that the Gargoyles are so phenomenal that if you're not running them, why? You should. They're just very good. And they allow for some really strong primary trade and primary game for Tyranids, as well as scoring, because they're so fast. And they're deep strike, shoot, and then move 6 inches after you deep strike, possibly take an opponent's objective if they're not carefully hiding it. They're great. S tier right behind Biovore, easy. Here's a Harpy. I think Harpies are worse than the Hierodules. Oh no. I'm just kidding. But not really. Yeah, yes, of course. We'll put the Harpy up here just because we can play him. Or her, or them, I don't know. Because we can play them in a competitive list. Technically, they're just so many points that and their guns really don't do anything. So yeah, they're there. Harpy is, for right now, top of D tier. Aircraft is just kind of bad unless it's really, really good in Warhammer right now. And our aircraft is not really, really good, so it's bad. I hope that makes sense. They it's like one venom cannon that's twin linked instead of two venom cannons. It's just not worth the points. I think they're 215 points. You could have an Exocrine and a Deathleaper for the cost of a Harpy. I might be wrong with the points total, but I'm pretty sure that's where they're at. So just don't run Harpies right now. However, Harridan, ooh-wee, bottom of C tier for right now. So where the Harpy is top of D tier, absolutely. The Harridan, I think, is going to be at the bottom of C tier. I don't think the Harridan is the worst unit in the game. I don't think it's the best. And if you look behind me, all the way back there, I might be a little bit biased. There is a Harridan back there. If you haven't seen it, I've played the Harridan twice on stream, and I'm proud to claim that I am 2-0 with the Harridan in 10th edition. So, must be an incredible unit, right? I think it's fine, actually. I think the gun is actually pretty good. Strength 10 on it is kind of, it's all right. If it was like strength 12 or something, it would be very, very good. But the fact that you just get so many shots with that gun, and then you're able to stack some buffs on it. I always ran it in an invasion fleet, and that's for two things. One, in order to get like sustained hits or lethal hits or whatever I wanted off of those two big guns. And then in addition to, I would put a Neuroloid with the Harridan all the time. And then if Harold Danford, as I call him, gets into any danger, then I can just 1 CP pop the 5-up Feel No Pain, and hopefully the Harridan sticks around for another turn. Because it does take a lot to kill a Harridan, and it takes even more to kill a Harridan if you are at a 5-up Feel No Pain. However, he is at bottom of C tier because he has 610 points. And no matter how much I like the Harridan, I can't ignore the fact that he has 610 points. And that is more than a quarter of your army. So you then get to the point where you have to build around the Harridan. And if the Harridan gets killed immediately because it's a 3-up save, no invuln, then it can be tough. Another thing that you could do is put him in Synaptic Nexus, so you can always try to have that 5-up invuln on it. But I don't know. It's not phenomenal. It's not terrible. It's just the Harridan. It's bottom of C tier currently. Next up, we have the Haruspex. Haruspex, I have a love-hate relationship with. I want it to be just a little bit better. And unfortunately, I think we are at the point in the edition with units like the Haruspex. I don't think Games Workshop is interested in buffing the rules of the Haruspex. They are probably just going to adjust point totals if we get to that point. Now, I really don't think the Haruspex is going to get points adjustments in the next slate. And I don't really think it needs points adjustments. I just think it's one of those units that if it had just a tiny bit more, then it could do very well. Like I've said, I've been playing Assimilation Swarm a little bit. I do really like one Haruspex in my Assimilation Swarm list, just to kind of go up and just do some damage. The 5-up lethals in that detachment specifically is very good for it, and I think it really does help it. It just kind of becomes a monster at that point. I also don't mind it in Invasion. I like it less in Invasion now that we can only do that stratagem, the 5-up Feel No Pain stratagem once, because I'm really going to be wanting to save that stratagem for things like a Malaceceptor or like a Tyrannofex or even an Exocrine if it gets into danger. So that kind of deters me from wanting to run a Haruspex and a Malaceceptor and an Exocrine and all these other things, because it just takes up too much space on the board. And then I need to kind of figure out where my stratagems are going and where I'm using that support, if that makes sense. So for right now, even though I think the Haruspex is good in Assimilation Swarm, I think that he's going to go top of C tier for right now, because it's not terrible. I do think it is good, and I'll put him bottom of B tier. I'll put the Haruspex bottom of B tier, just because it does get some use in Assimilation Swarm. Not all the time. I don't think the Haruspex is a windmill slam in Assimilation Swarm, even that, because I just think there are some other units that might do a little bit better than the Haruspex. Next up, we have the Hierophant, which is very cool. Huge model. A lot of guns. It flies. It takes up half the board. I'm going to put it at bottom of C tier. I think it's like 810 points or something like that. It is an astronomically high-priced point for a model. It's very cool. It transports, and that's another thing I forgot to mention about the Harridan. The Harridan transports gargoyles, which is something that I think is really cool. You move the Harridan out, gargoyles can jump out and do their gargoyle business. I think that's really cool. However, with the Hierophant, it gets to the point where it doesn't really matter how good a unit is if it takes so many points out. And we're at that point with the Hierophant. So I think the Hierophant is probably top of D tier as opposed to bottom of C tier. I just rate the Harridan a little bit better than the Hierophant just because it's really not, like, it is a huge point investment. Yes, of course. However, I just think above 800 points for a model is too much. And it's, I don't think it's really going to win you too many games. Well, I mean, if you win a game and you're running a Hierophant, it is probably because of the Hierophant. But if you go to a competitive space, I do think there are a lot of armies that will be able to take care of a Hierophant. And then that's like half of your army that's dead. So not really a space that you want to be in. So yeah, Hierophant, top of D tier. Next up, we have the Hive Crone. I'm going to put the Hive Crone behind the Harpy. It's just not good, and I think it's okay that aircraft is not amazing right now. It's whatever, it's kind of the game and how Games Workshop has designed the game at the moment. It's just what it is, There's a long time in 9th edition where you took a bunch of Harpies and you just did terrible things to your opponent. And I was one of those people who did those terrible things. So I'm okay that Harpies and Hive Crones just kind of don't exist in that space anymore. I think that is fine. The Venom Cannons were incredibly strong. Yeah, and I just don't think it's a style of gameplay that I'm excited to play. And I don't think it's a style of gameplay that Games Workshop really wants in the game. So I'm okay with these two flyers not being great. In addition, also things that Games Workshop doesn't want to be good is Hive Guard. Hive Guard, if you were around for beginning of 9th edition, they were just, oh my gosh, so good. They were disgustingly good. And they are definitely now in the same kind of vein of what we were talking about with the Harpy and the Hive Crone. They're not very good. And I think it's because Games Workshop didn't want Tyranids to have the indirect spam where we just sit back and we just shoot a bunch of stuff over and over and over and over. Some people do say, well, what about the shock cannon? Because it has like anti-vehicle, is it 2-up? I don't know where my phone is. It's either 2-up or 4-up. So you do punch through some vehicles, or you rather wound some vehicles pretty easily. I'm looking it up right now. Sorry, everybody. Hive Guard. Shock cannon, anti-vehicle 2-up. That's pretty cool. The only problem is it's not devastating wounds, which, of course, anti-vehicle 2-up devastating wounds, yes, I agree, would be way too much. That would be crazy. However, my problem with the Hive Guard shock cannon, and this is my huge problem with it, and this is why I don't run it, is it's AP1. It's only AP1. Tyranids really, we don't have a whole bunch of access to additional AP. Really, the only additional AP that we can get, recurringly and able to get it pretty much all the time is like a Pyrovore removing cover. So where technically some people say, yes, that is pretty much +1 AP. It's really not, because everything's going to be in cover all the time and it's just going to be -1 AP. But the things that I want to kill with Hive Guard shock cannon are going to have like a 3-up, 2-up save. So if they're in cover, or if they're just only taking -1 AP, and my opponent is rolling 4-ups or 3-ups on my supposed anti-vehicle gun, I'm not really interested in it. So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to put Hiveguard bottom of C tier. And you might be saying, Jordan, does that mean you would take a Harridan before you would take Hiveguard? Yes, probably. I will concede that, okay, maybe Hiveguard are better just because of the points total of Harridans. But it's a Harridan. You know what I'm saying? And I'm probably not taking either. But if I had to choose between two of them, I'm just going to throw the points in and take a Harridan. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so Hiveguard, bottom of C tier. The Overwatch thing is kind of cute. On 4s if you're on objective. But now that you can't do it indirect, I don't know. I'm not super excited on Hiveguard. Same thing like I was saying with Harpies. I think they were just very, very good, and GW is tired of seeing that kind of mechanic and doesn't really want it in the game. Now, moving on to units Games Workshop does want to buff. We're talking the Hive Tyrant. Hive Tyrant is probably one of my favorite units in the game. Basically, the Hive Tyrant became a unit where Games Workshop just stapled a bunch of rules onto it over and over and over and over until it just became phenomenal. It is so good. Pretty much in every single detachment that you will be taking, any detachment you will be taking, you'll be running this Hive Tyrant. And if it's not that Hive Tyrant, it's probably Winged Hive Tyrant. And then if it's not that one, then it's Swarmlord, which we'll talk about him later. But the free strat for 12 inches, phenomenal. So good. And then the advance and shoot, also so good. Like those are the two rules that it started with. It's very good. But then GW said, okay, well, let's also give it lethals. Oh my gosh. So 6 inches within it, you also get lethals. It's just phenomenal. And it basically like took over the Tervigon's job and said, hey, get out of here, Tervigon. Which is kind of sad for the Tervigon, but it's very good for the Hive Tyrant. So it's just a really good support piece. I personally think it is appropriately pointed at 235 points. I think that's pretty good. I don't think it really needs to get higher. I don't really think it needs to get lower at all. In fact, if it went lower, I think that would be bad for the game. I think every single army should have a unit that is somewhat broken and somewhat broken good, you know? It just so happens we have a couple of those. One of them being the Hive Tyrant. Hive Tyrant is going to go near middle S tier. I think a Hive Tyrant is marginally better than an Exocrine, but I do think if it comes down to it, I do think I'm taking a Biovore or Gargoyles before I take a Hive Tyrant. And we come to a contentious point. Is the Biovore better than Gargoyles? In my opinion, yes. I think the Biovore is better than Gargoyles because he's going to hold your home point for 50 points. That's just phenomenal in itself. You don't have to dedicate a specific unit besides the Biovore to hold your home field. And he does all those other things that we were talking about. And there have been times where I have not run Gargoyles, specifically like in a weird Crusher Stampede list, but I have always ran a Biovore. So just to update for our tier rankings, Biovore, top of S tier, Gargoyles right behind. Hive Tyrant, newly introduced into the S tier. I think it is very strong as well. Then Exocrine finishes up S tier. Then we have Broodlord, Genestealers, and A tier grouped together. Top of B tier, we have Deathleaper, then Carnifex, then Haruspex at bottom of B tier. C tier, we have Barbgaunts, the Harridan, and Hiveguard. And then D tier, we don't really need to talk about too much, but it's a Hierophant, Harpy, Hivecrone, and then the Hierodules, which don't really exist anymore. Yeah, okay, moving right along, we have Hormagaunts. I really like Hormagaunts. Hormagaunts kind of suffer from what I was talking about with the Deathleaper, where they're a very good unit, and a lot of armies and other detachments would have loved to run them. But the fact that we have access to Gargoyles, they're only 20 points cheap or 20 points more expensive, I tend to run Gargoyles way more than I do Hormagaunts. Now, however, they're pretty good. They're not bad, especially with the change to Synapse. Moving the Hormagaunts strength from strength 3 to strength 4 is actually a pretty good breaking point. Space Marines, being able to be wounded on 4s instead of 5s is really nice. And then that AP 1 is also really good. And Invasion Swarm invasion fleet, getting sustained hits or lethal hits on 30 attacks with Hormagaunts that's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie to you. That's pretty strong. And then regrowing these Hormagaunts are also pretty good in invasion fleet or assimilation swarm. So you have a pretty good time with them like that. However, I think they are just below our Genestealers. I think for right now, Hormagaunts are going to be bottom of A tier. Because in my list construction, a lot of times, if I'm running like a scalpel unit, I run Broodlord and Genestealers. But honestly, I often find myself really trying to find the extra 20 points in order to upgrade, to air quote, upgrade my Hormagaunts into Gargoyles. So, you know, I don't know. I think Hormagaunts are very good. I just think that they're going to be bottom of A tier for right now, as opposed to pushing into the S tier. The Advance in Charge is very strong, and OC2 is also very good with a high body count model unit. So that's where I'm putting them right now, bottom of A tier. Lictor. Now, a Lictor, for me, at this point, I'm putting the Lictor at the bottom of S tier. It's for a couple of reasons. One, it's 60 points, lone op, infiltrates, and rapid ingresses for free, as well as fights first. You know, like honestly, if you're able to string out your Neurotyrant so that you can ping the Lictor with Synapse, and so he's at strength 8 instead of strength 7, that's a huge breaking point. And I feel like I'm very confident at that point of him just going up and eating a scout squad. It happens pretty quickly. And if you don't kill the scout squad on like first hit, then you tie them up and you really don't allow for them to do anything else in the future turns. In addition, the rapid ingress for free is very strong. There's a list that I played for quite some time with some really good success that had 3 Lictors, and my go-to was always have 2 Lictors on the board to infiltrate and kind of take some objectives that I want, and then have a third one in strategic reserves just so I can rapid ingress to do secondaries or just bring them out and do a secondary. 60 points to do secondaries is pretty good. That's fine. It'll get you 3 points on containment or whatever. They're just a very strong unit. I run at least a bare minimum of 2 in pretty much any list that I run right now. And if I'm able to squeeze that third Lictor in, I'm pretty happy doing that. So because of those reasons, I think he's bottom of S tier right now. Very, very good unit. Just 60 points, scores very well. Just does a really good job. Malaceceptor. Now, in my opinion, and I have very begrudgingly accepted this in my own playstyle, I think that Malaceceptor has kind of slipped a little bit down the ladder. There's a specific unit that I feel like made it do that, where instead of me running 2 Malaceptors in like an invasion fleet list, I'm only going to run 1, and I'm going to use it in a very specific way. This Malaceceptor, when I use it, a little Malaceceptor lesson, I guess, is I kind of consider it like the second wave of stuff that I send out. So I'm going to have things that are sitting on objectives to initiate like a trade war with my opponent. And then I kind of want that Malaceceptor to be the thing that answers after my opponent kills whatever I first put on the objective. So the flow would be either Hormagaunts, Gargoyles, or a Lictor on an objective. Something that I like, but something that if I lose, it's only 60, 85 points. And it's okay. And then I would follow that up with a Malaceceptor because it's extremely durable. It has a pretty good chance of killing, one of those mid-tier units from your opponent. And it is definitely a unit that your opponent is going to have to commit way more into than what a Malaceceptor is worth with 170 points. So I really do like Malaceceptor. However, for that specific role that I just detailed, I'm not really sure I need more than 1 of them, I have not considered cutting a Malaceceptor at all, like going no Malaceptors in a list. And for that reason, I think it's still strongly in A tier. I am actually going to put it in front of Broodlord and Genestealers. And I might adjust that later. But because of those things that I just said, it's just a really good anchor point unit that allows for your game to continue with a specific flow. So yeah, I like Malaceceptor, top of A tier for right now. But do recognize that my rating on it has slipped a little bit because of a unit's upgrade that we'll talk about later on in the video. Mawloc. Now, if you if you are a viewer of our army list live shows that we do once a week, you will know that my chat is very there's a lot of Mawloc stands in the chat, pretty much at all times, where I've had to come up with a rule. I won't cut 2 Mawlocs in a list. If somebody submits a list and they say I want 2 Mawlocs in it, okay, fine. I won't cut 2 Mawlocs. That's a rule that chat and I have come up with. I cut them all the time. I'm not a huge Mawloc fan. They're okay in Vanguard Onslaught. I think people overrate the Mawloc quite a bit for the Mortals thing. And I've given this exact example a whole bunch. Here's some packaging tape that I have right here. Okay. So the Mawloc's whole thing is it's going to drop down, and anything within 12 inches is going to possibly get Mortals and then possibly Battle Shock. So we're going to look at this little tape thing. The outside clear-ish ring, that's the range of 12 inches right there. And if you think about it, that's the range of 12 inches of anything that it drops around and is going to be able to spam Mortals at, okay? However, this cardboard circle, the inner circle of this, is the 9-inch range of deep strikes, okay? So I know this is a very strange visual aid that it just came up with. However, that 3-inch circle between 9 inches and 12 inches, even though this is a weird tape demonstration, is very slim. So the amount of area that you are actually able to affect your opponent's units because of that, thin margin of 9 inches to 12 inches is very slim. So I feel like a Mawloc is one of those units where it gets worse the better your opponent is. If your opponent is able to say, okay, well, I'm going to move my Nurglings out like this, and I'm going to have them be 3.1 inches away from my important stuff, then all of a sudden your Mawloc is not able to come in and hurt the stuff that is behind the Nurglings. And I am not a fan of running units that I feel like my opponent can easily just turn off, and flip a switch and just say, okay, that unit is not functioning in the way that you, Jordan, were intending it for. And because of that, I don't run Mawlocs in my Vanguard Onslaught list. And also I'm going to put the Mawloc at top of C tier. I do think it's okay if you're able to do the wombo combo, yo-yo Mawloc, and you bring them back up and down. And that is cool. If you're able to do that, that's awesome. However, it's still 145 points. And those 145 points are not really holding objectives. They're not really charging and killing other things besides doing those Mortals. And they're eating all of your command points. So for 290 points for 2 Mawlocs, pretty much, half of your CP for the game is going to be dedicated to that. Okay. So I'm not a huge fan of Mawlocs, top of C tier for right now. I'm going to put them below the Barbgaunts. I'm not going to offend people and put them below the Harridan. Yeah, maybe I will. Okay, Mawloc behind Harridan. Please don't come at me. No, he's better than the Harridan. Anyways, moving on. This ugly Squidward, I believe, is the Mucolid Spore. And you can tell how much knowledge I have on it by calling it ugly Squidward. I think it's bottom of C tier. I think I don't think you run these, I think they're all right if you really, really want to run it with a Sporocyst. Don't run it just by itself. Oh, I'm just making sure. Okay, we do have a Tyrannocyte in this. All right. It's just like a Biovore. Don't run the Spore Mines. Run the Biovore to generate the Spore Mines. It's the same thing. Sporocyst, if you really want a Mucolid Spore in your army, run the Sporocyst. It's still not great either, but at least it could generate the Mucolid Spore. So I'm going to put it near the top of D tier, right above the Hierodules. So not top of D tier, actually, near the bottom of D tier. Excuse me. Okay. Yeah, just don't run that. Run something else. Next up, we have the Neurogaunts. This is a unit that I think is pretty good. I think it is all right. But again, it does kind of suffer from the problem that Tyranids have too many good units, I guess is what I'm saying, really. Because just like I said, I am always looking for 20 points to upgrade my Hormagaunts to Gargoyles. For Neurogaunts, I believe I would always be looking for 15 or 20 points to upgrade them to Termagants or Hormagaunts. However, that being said, they are 11 models. That is good for 45 points, which is it's actually an incredible rate. That is really, really good. They do branch out and give synapse. I think that is also strong and is helpful, especially with the +1 strength now that we have. It's good. However, that's kind of all they do. And then if they get singled out and killed, then that kind of stinks. If the Neurogaunts moved like 8 inches instead of 6 inches, I think that definitely changes my ranking, and I think they're way higher. For right now, though, I'm not super excited to play Neurogaunts at all. I would probably play them before I play Barbgaunts. However, I don't know. I think they're okay. I've heard some people are using them to like hold their home objective besides a Biovore. I don't really encourage doing that because a Biovore holds your home objective and then does so many other things. So yeah, for right now, I'm going to put them at top of C tier. I think they are better than Barbgaunts. I am excited about 11 models for 45 points. The synapses, it's okay. I really think if you practice your positioning and are able to really meaningfully hand out your Neuroloids from your Neurotyrant, then I don't really think you need the Neurogaunts. So for those reasons, I think the Neurogaunts are top of C tier. I don't think they're terrible. I'm just not super excited at running them, and I would rather run Hormagaunts or squeeze points for Termagants or even Gargoyles at that point. So top of C tier for the Neurogaunts. Everyone, if you're unfamiliar with the channel, if this is the first time you've hung out, we do tactics videos like this one. This is kind of a tactics video. It's just really me rambling. Every single week, sometime in the weekend, I will put them out. And it's just discussing where Tyranids are, some really cool tactics within Tyranids, etc. It's just a good time. If that's the kind of stuff that you're interested in, please consider subscribing. We're just making really good content. We're going to continue to make some good content for everybody that is wanting to listen. In addition, the namesake of our channel, Wednesday Night Warhammer, every single Wednesday night around 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we play a competitive game of Warhammer 40k. And we do some goofy stuff while we're on stream. We've been on a pepper kick. If you want to force me or my buddies to eat peppers while we're playing Warhammer, come on in. It's a good time. All right, enough shilling. Moving on to the Neurolictor. Now, the Neurolictor is a unit that at the beginning of the edition was just broken. It was so good. And it has kind of gotten to the point where GW has found a point total for the Neurolictor where people are scratching their head up, like, do we really run Neurolictors? Short answer for me is no. I don't think you run Neurolictors unless you are in Vanguard Onslaught or unless your specific detachment or build focuses around the Neurolictor, which, if you remember our definition of tiers at the beginning of the video, means that the Neurolictor is strongly B tier because of that definition. It excels in specific detachments and in specific scenarios. However, I'm not super excited to run it besides a Lictor or Deathleaper. However, I do think a Lictor is better than a Carnifex and better than a Haruspex, probably not as good as a Deathleaper. So because of that, I'm going to put it top of B tier. I think it is cool. You can kind of like spook people from staying off an objective or an area of the board because they don't want to be battle shocked by its ability. However, then your opponent can just put 2 units on the objective and then, and especially if you're going against like Space Marines or something with a pretty good leadership, they're probably just going to say, okay, I'm just going to roll my leadership and it'll be fine. And they're probably right. It will be fine. So because of that, I'm going to put it top of B tier. It's a lone op with stealth with a 4-up invuln, which is very strong. Recently, I was playing a live stream where I was playing into Guilliman and Ultramarines with a really goofy Tyranid list. And my buddy Tucker was like, do you want to roll this? It was Guilliman going into a Neurolictor. And I said, yes, because it's a 4-up invuln. And he lives, Guilliman can't kill a Neurolictor. So maybe run him. But no, he's top of B tier. I think he's just behind Deathleaper, but in front of the Singleton Carnifex and in front of the Haruspex as well. Moving on, we have the Neurotyrant. I think Neurotyrant is probably the second best support unit in our codex, behind, of course, the Walking Hive Tyrant, because of the Synapse thing that it can go out and daisy chain stuff. And make sure that everything is in Synapse. That's very strong. 18 inches too is a huge reach. I'm not really sure why it's 18 inches, but I'm not going to argue. I'm just going to say thank you, Games Workshop, and I'm going to put my Neuroloids 18 inches away every single time. It also has a really good flamer. It's also very durable. It is one of those units where you can kind of just like throw it out there, honestly, and that's something I'm trying to work on in my gameplay, is being more aggressive with my Neurotyrant because it has such a good flamer. And it's really durable. I think it's T8, 9 wounds, 4-up invuln. That's really strong, and it's really not easy for your opponent to kill. So they have to dedicate some really strong, like, anti-tank in order to kill it. And then if it's trying to kill your Neurotyrant, it's not trying to kill your Exocrines or your Malaceptors or whatever. It's pretty good. I really do like it. I think it is going to be top of A tier. There have been few lists where I haven't run a Neurotyrant, but they have existed. So I don't think it quite pushes into S tier. I definitely think that this unit is probably going to stay at top of A tier for the rest of the list. We'll see. It's very strong. I think you should run one. But I don't think it's S tier. I don't think it's a huge, terrible crime if you don't run them. Of course, it's not if you don't run any of these, in the S tier, but I just think in list composition, I generally include a Neurotyrant. But if I'm not, and I have these other things, the Exocrine, Lictor, Hive Tyrant, Gargoyle, and Biovore, then my list is probably going to be okay with it. I just have to plan a little bit more of the Synapse. But definitely think the Neurotyrant is better than Malaceceptor, Broodlord, Genestealers, and Hormagaunts, for sure. Next up, the Norn Assimilator. Okay, so it recently, and this is one of the recent changes, of course, with the data slate, it recently got the Harvester keyword, meaning it is firmly in Assimilation Swarm, and it has a great time in Assimilation Swarm. This thing is a whole lot of fun to run in Assimilation Swarm. I really, really like it. It's still like 270 points. So that's the thing that kind of deters me a little bit. It's a 2-up with a 5-up Feel No Pain, hopefully. I pretty much never commit my Norn Emissary or my Norn Assimilator unless they are firmly on the objective. So I don't know. I think he is good. I think the fact that he can just heal himself by himself is really strong every single turn. But I'm not like super, super, super excited to just slam this on the board and then like run with it, just because AP4 does exist, or AP5 rather. Well, AP5 doesn't really exist too much. But the fact that you can put this guy to a 5-up or a 6-up save instead of like the Norn Emissary, which is a 4-up invuln, it kind of makes it a little bit spooky to run. I do, in Assimilation Swarm, think that the Norn Assimilator is it better than a Haruspex? I don't know, actually. I think it's just behind the Haruspex in B tier, so right at the bottom of B tier for the Norn Assimilator. I think running one of them in Assimilation Swarm is pretty fun. I think it's pretty cool, and I think he does take quite a bit to kill. So in Assimilation Swarm, in your go turn, if you kind of just like push everything forward, and one of those things that you're pushing forward is a Norn Assimilator on its objective where it gets the 5-up Feel No Pain, that can be pretty tough for your opponent to deal with. However, if you're just committing in a Norn Assimilator by itself, I would be scared about that. I'm not 100% confident that a Norn Assimilator can just tank an entire army of shooting or combat by itself. So kind of has to go in tandem with other things. So bottom of B tier. Next up, we have the Norn Emissary. And the Norn Emissary is kind of similar but different because of two things. One, it has a 4-up invuln, which is huge. 4-up invuln is phenomenal. And it has a 4-up Feel No Pain to mortals at all times. And because of those two things with a little bit of extra durability, I think I rank it quite a bit higher than the Norn Assimilator. It also is run in more things than just one detachment. I see a lot of people actually running them in Invasion Fleet to relatively good success. Because you just, I guess, have two things with a 5-up Feel No Pain at that point. Because you can pop the stratagem with one, and then you can just have your Norn on the point with the other. In addition, I guess you also have the Hive Tyrant with 5-up Feel No Pain too, which would help. It's really good in Synaptic Nexus as well as kind of like an anchor point. The reinforced Hive node is really good with it as well. If you have it in cover and do that with, which is basically Tyranid AOC, then you can, you can have a 0-up save, I guess, technically, meaning you would need AP3 in order to get a Norn to a 3-up save as opposed to a 2-up, which is pretty strong. So because of those reasons, I still think it's B tier. I still think you run it a little bit more. I personally rate it just below a Neurolictor. So near the top of B tier, just below a Neurolictor. That's where I would run the Norn Emissary. All right. Next up, we have Old One Eye. So with Old One Eye, there's two schools of thought, I think, with running this guy is either you run him with the double shooting Carnifexes, and you just have like a whole bunch of shots moving at the Carnifexes, and it's really good because they reroll all their hits. And he's a really good unit with that. Or you just run him by himself. Maybe you rapid ingress him or something, and he just goes and he deals with stuff. Both are really good ideas. I tend to like him with the brick of Carnifexes just to really enable him to reroll all his hits, as well as giving this really like surprisingly powerful shooting platform with two of those Carnifexes. So, that being said, that brick is almost 400 points. And yes, it technically did go down, I believe, 10 points because the Carnifexes were a little bit buffed by 10 points each. But, 10 points here and there is really not going to do anything. Do I think he's better than Deathleaper or a Neurolictor? I don't think so. I think I like Old One Eye top of B tier. Old One Eye is one of those units where if you are running him, you're kind of going to build the rest of your list around him, or he's just in this awkward 150 point slot where you just kind of put him there as a unit to run out and do his business, That being said, he's good. However, in order for him to get like fully efficient, you want to run the two other Carnifexes with him. And then at that point, it's pushing 400 points. And it's that is a lot. That's a fifth of your list is this Old One Eye brick, which if you use it correctly, it can be very, very strong. However, if you're not like 100% able to use it appropriately, then it can get to a point where like, could those points be used better elsewhere? And oftentimes, probably yes, so that is an unfortunate part. Okay. Next up, we have the Parasite of Mortrex. This guy's pretty cool. He moves fast. He moves 12. He's lone op. He creates rippers, and that's about it. He's a character too, so he can carry some enhancements. Something that I've seen a lot of people in our community bring in our army list review shows is the Dirge Heart. So you like trigger Battle Shock, and it's at like an additional -1. It can be pretty sweet. I think that's a cool combo. I'm not super excited to run him. And unfortunately, it's and I hate to be bringing this argument up over and over. It's just because we have better units to run. Like I think I personally am going to run a Neurolictor or a Deathleaper, or definitely a Lictor before a Parasite. And now, one of those reasons where that kind of comes to fruition is because it is a character. And there have been times in the past where Warhammer 40k, we want a bunch of characters out like last what was it, the Leviathan mission deck with Sights of Power. That is a good reason to have a Parasite and Vortex, just so you can have him out there and generate more primary off of that specific mission. However, in Pariah Nexus right now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, well, I guess the secret mission, if your Parasite is your Warlord and you take over your opponent's objective on the last turn, then yes, he's very good. In that case, a Parasite and Vortex is phenomenal. Otherwise, I do think the Parasite is just kind of giving up assassination points where your other characters are probably going to be a little bit more castled. So I'm not really loving the Parasite in that regard. I think he is probably, I think I would actually run Neurogaunts before I would run Parasite. So I think he's near the top of C tier. I think the model's very cool. It's very Tyranidy. I think they did a great job with it when it came out. Unfortunately, just in my opinion, I'm not super excited about running the Parasite and Vortex. Next up, we have the Psychophage, which I'm going to be honest, I actually kind of like. I kind of like the Psychophages. 95 points. They're pretty good in Assimilation Swarm. They give everything a 6-up Feel No Pain. They're 5-up Feel No Pain itself. There's something that your opponent really doesn't want to shoot or kill at, because all it does is it just like sits somewhere, and it just is kind of in a space. You know, it holds points, it gives buffs to other things, and then it regenerates in Assimilation Swarm. So that's kind of all it does, but it does it pretty well. The weapons are meh, whatever, but giving those buffs, and being able to regenerate in Assimilation Swarm is really good. And we're also at the point where, like, 95 points, you start running, Psychophages. There's a world where if they come down to 80 points, I feel like almost every single Tyranid list maybe thinks about jamming 3 of them and just says, go, and like sends all of them up the board. And like, what does your opponent do when you have 3 Psychophages out there, and then followed up with a bunch of Tyranid monsters that even come behind that? Because of all those reasons, I actually think that Psychophage is like mid B tier. I think a Norn Emissary is better than a Psychophage. And I think Old One Eye, of course, is better than Psychophage as well. Although I think I do like Psychophages more than I like the singleton Carnifexes. Even in like Crusher Stampede, because in Crusher Stampede, you don't have access to a Feel No Pain besides like data sheets or besides this Psychophage right here. So giving a 6-up Feel No Pain to your monsters who have lots of wounds could be very strong. In Assimilation Swarm, they're just really, really good. You want to run 2 to 3 of these minimum. In Assimilation Swarm, my list that I'm running right now has 2 of them. They're just very strong. And I really like Psychophages, actually. And I know it's funny, I feel like I'm rating Psychophages really high, and I'm still only putting them mid B tier. But it's because if you look at other detachments, like if you look at Invasion Fleet, you're not really super excited about running a Psychophage just because you have the access to the 5-up Feel No Pain. It just excels really well in Assimilation Swarm, and that's just so happens to be the detachment I'm excited about running right now. So middle B tier for Psychophage, and I feel pretty confident about that. Next up, speaking of an Assimilation Swarm legend, we have Pyrovores. Now, Pyrovores are kind of a unit that, yes, they're good in Assimilation Swarm, of course, but they are also good in pretty much anywhere else that you can fit them. They're 40 points now, which is a little bit of a buff. I mean, a little bit of nerf from what they used to be. However, they're still very good. They strip cover, and they actually have a pretty good gun. In addition, I've ran them a lot where they just come in from strategic reserves. They do a secondary, and they score points, and then they probably die. But also, there's a case where they don't die because they're like T6, 5 wounds, 3-up save. So it's another one of those units where your opponent begrudgingly has to put quite a bit of fire or killing power into in order to kill one. And if you run them in Assimilation Swarm, then they have to do with 2 or 3, which is not probably what they want to do at that point. I think Pyrovores are near the bottom of A tier. I actually do like Pyrovores better than Deathleaper, which is why they're up there, just because it's 40 points. They function pretty well in any detachment, and they function even better in Assimilation Swarm. So I think they're pretty much firmly in the bottom of A tier. They kind of fill that space of a support piece, a scoring piece, and then, I don't know, maybe like a little bit of a primary piece because they're a little bit harder to kill. But there they are, Pyrovores. You know what? I think I am going to knock them down to B tier. So top of B tier, top of B tier for Pyrovores. I'm excited to run them. However, they're not going to make every single list just because that 40-point total does get a little bit tight when we get down to the final 100 points of a Tyranid list. Okay. Raveners, and we're moving quite a bit through this codex. I think we're well halfway through. I think the rest of it's going to go a little bit quicker. Raveners, I really like Raveners. I think they're a phenomenal scoring piece. What I like to do is just deploy them in my backfield and just kind of set up like a little bit of a fence with them. They uppy downy each turn. You can deep strike them again, and they hit really hard. It's 21 attacks for a 75-point unit that hits on 3s, twin linked. It's just really good. I really like them. They kill infantry very well. If you can get sustained hits or +1 to wound or something like that on them, then they become even better. I specifically really like running them with Surprise Assault and Vanguard Onslaught. Like they charge in Surprise Assault. That means they hit on 2s and then they're twin linked. And then if your opponent fails their Battle Shock and then you get +1 to wound as well, then it's just phenomenal with that. So I rate Raveners pretty high. I actually think I like Raveners better than I like Hormagaunts. Just because they're an additional kind of like deep strike threat to allow for more shenanigans like that. And they're a unit that your opponent always kind of has to track where they are. Because they need to either screen out a Ravener squad or just accept that the Raveners could pop up during your turn at any point and just be somewhere. And that is something, keeping your opponent on their toes is definitely a good thing to have. However, Rippers, I don't like Rippers. I'm going to be honest with you. I think Rippers are a little bit better than Mawlocs. But even in Assimilation Swarm, I'm not super excited to run these. Maybe like one as like you can rapid ingress the Rippers. This is a lot of CP. You can spend 1 CP to rapid ingress Rippers during your opponent's turn, and so that they can regenerate something during your turn if your Harvester units are out of position. I think that's a cute play. However, it's 1 CP to put a 25-point unit on an objective, and it's not like, I'm not super excited about that. They don't have OC, and it's not like the thing where like, oh, they don't have OC, they can just score. Like, yes, you can do that, but also, I don't know, we just have so many other units that can do what Rippers can do and can do them better. Like a Biovore itself can shoot a Spore Mine, which is basically the equivalent to a Ripper at this point, except it does other things as well. And it's a smaller base, so it can fit other places. I think the Rippers are going to be firmly... No, I think I do like Mawlocs. I think I like Harridans better than... All right, so Rippers are bottom of C tier, just above Hive Guard. I don't know. It's a weird rating. The Screamer Killer. Now, the Screamer Killer is a unit that I really want to work. I really want it to do well. I just think it's suffering from two different things. One, it's just a little bit too expensive. And I know it's 145, so that is kind of a competitive price for a lot of units. But I just think it's just a little bit too expensive. When Exocrines are 135 points and they shoot, and we don't have to really worry about getting them to combat, they can just activate from across the table. I'm excited about Exocrines. For 145 points, which is 10 points higher, I'm not as excited for Screamer Killers. If Screamer Killers could natively advance and charge or do something like that, so it's a little bit easier to get them into combat, I would be much more excited about them. I have done things with success where I like rapid ingress Screamer Killers. I think that's a fun play. I think that's good. However, for 145 points, it is tough. Do I really want to be dedicating a CP and 145 points and also the possibility that my opponent can screen out my Screamer Killer? it's not amazing. I was really high on them when they went down to 145 points. Played a couple games with them, and I just don't think they quite get it, get it done. Because of that, I think Screamer Killers are going to be top of C tier. I'm not super excited to run them. I think there is an edge case where you run them if you build a little bit around them. But at that point, we're building around a 145 point unit that just does kind of okay. So I'm not super excited about them. Spore Mines, I'm going to put them next to Ugly Squidward near the middle bottom of D tier. Don't run Spore Mines by themselves as an actual unit. Just bring a Biovore. Sporocyst. Sporocyst is very interesting. I personally have never run one. I know they generate, things, but they're also a fortification, so they don't move, I believe. I think they're top of D tier. I think if you really want to run them, go for it. But honestly, it's like, I don't know. I don't think they're good. I wouldn't be excited to run one. I think they're cool. I think if you're running one, I think it's a meme already. But there we are. Swarmlord. Definitely not a meme. I think Swarmlord is strong. I think he is pretty good. He suffers from the same problem that I've been talking about the entire video, where we just have other units that kind of do the same thing, but also don't do the same thing. So he's just going to be rated lower than the Hive Tyrant. But if you think about it, he's a really good support piece. He gives you 1 CP every single turn. And then he also, deters from your opponent's CP. He has a Vector, and that's very strong. And he's also a beat stick. I really like him in Crusher Stampede. I think in that detachment, he kind of functions very well as just kind of this mid-board threat that goes up and allows for your Malaceptors, for your Tyrannofexes and everything to kind of function better because he's there and he's being spooky. He's great. I think he's pretty cool, but oftentimes I'm not running him because I'm running a Hive Tyrant. And they kind of function the same slot like that. So it's like if oftentimes I'm running shooting castles with my Tyranid list. So I would much rather run Swarmlord. Hive Tyrant instead of a Swarmlord, just because I get all those shooting buffs from a Hive Tyrant. I'm going to put him bottom of A tier. I think he is good. I think you definitely have to do specific things with him in order to make him function, incredibly, but there he is. Termagants. I really like the 20-man Termagant blob and Invasion Fleet. You stack a bunch of buffs on them. You make them very defensive. Get out of here, ad. You make them defensive, and then you can regrow them in your turn. It's very strong. Also, Assimilation Swarm could be pretty cool as well. I don't think it is as good as in Invasion Fleet with the 20-man blob, but it could be good in Assimilation Swarm. Endless Swarm, I don't know. I just think that detachment kind of got nerfed into the ground with the stratagem removed. Well, not removed, but you can only do it once per game. And I just think Invasion Fleet, just kind of does it better in a weird way. But anyways, going off of a tangent, that's a different video. I think Termagants are good. I think they are mid B tier for sure. I think they are just... I think they're just behind Old One Eye. So directly in the middle of B tier, they're just behind Old One Eye. I think they're a little bit better than a Norn. But in order for them to function in a way where they're better than a Norn, they have to be supported. You have to do things like put Venomthropes in. You have to do things like a Psychophage, or, have a Hive Tyrant with a 5-up Feel No Pain at the ready, and then regrow them or plan around your army around doing those things with that. So understand that I think Termagants are middle B tier, but you have to build around them. And I think you need to have at least, if you're going Swarm, you need to have at least 60 Termagants in order to flood the board immediately. There's a lot of armies that can kill 20 or 40 Termagants. When you get to that 60 point where you are putting invulnerable saves on them, when you're putting on Feel No Pains, when you're putting stealth on them and cover, I think that is the point where your opponent is going to have a hard time dealing with 60 of them instead of 20 or 40. So middle B tier, build around your Termagants. Don't just put 20 in a list and say, there's my Termagants. You have to put other pieces around them in order for them to function. Believe it or not, one of those pieces is not a Tervigon. I actually rate the Tervigon pretty low right now. I'm going to put him or her middle C tier. I think the Tervigon is cool. It's one of my favorite models. I have one that I painted up, and I really enjoy the way I painted it, and it was a whole lot of fun to paint. I just haven't played it all of 10th edition. And especially now that the Hive Tyrant has access to the lethals that the Tervigon would be giving, the Hive Tyrant is basically a Tervigon, at this point. Especially if you're running the Swarm list and Invasion Fleet, which I think is a really cool list. You just regen the Termagants over and over with the stratagem as opposed to, regenerating more with the Tervigon. Now, you could have both, but then that's like over 400 points, I believe, of characters to support your Termagants, where you could just probably have more Termagants, at that point. So I think there needs to be a buff to the Tervigon. And this is one of the units that I actually do think GW, if they, I don't know what they could do to make the Tervigon taken besides putting it at like 150 points. If you put it at 150 points, you probably take it. However, then everybody's taking 3 Tervigons, and then we have like 80 Termagants. Whatever. I think the Tervigon needs some love. I think it's middle C tier, easily. Another unit that I think needs some love is the Toxicrene. I'm not super excited about the Toxicrene. Everybody always says this. It's the tentacles, they get in the way. But even if the tentacles didn't get in the way, and you could move it around the board pretty easily, it's just not really good enough for its point price, I think. So I think I'm going to put the Toxicrene. I think if you make the argument, maybe it's better than Hive Guard. It's not better than Rippers. It's not better than the Harridan, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah, so Toxicrene is going to go bottom of C tier for right now. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. Next up, we have the Trygon. Trygon was also kind of nerfed and then buffed in the same vein. Was at 170 points, and then Games Workshop said, you can't deep strike 3 inches. Nobody can do that. And I actually really thank Games Workshop for doing that. That was probably my least favorite aspect of the game, is the 3-inch deep strike. So now that it's 6-inch deep strike, I really do think you can screen it a lot easier. The Trygon does hit kind of hard if it's able to connect. You are also not able to rapid ingress 6 inches. It's just when you deep strike. So I don't know. I do think he hits kind of hard. I used to like him in Crusher Stampede, but the 3-inch nerf, I think, really, really hit Trygons hard. I'm really actually not super excited to run them. I actually think Mawlocs are better than Trygons at this point, even though my whole Mawloc spiel I already went on. I think they are better than Toxicrenes, but honestly, I would run Rippers before Trygons. Like, obviously, they're 2 very, very different units, and they don't really, that's not a good or fair comparison. However, in a competitive sake, I do think Rippers are probably stronger than Trygons, so we are going to put Trygons near the bottom of C tier, just above a Toxicrene, which makes me kind of sad. I'm not going to lie, because I thought the Trygon was actually kind of good before. Just that nerf really hit it really hard, I think. So they're not really able to get where they want to be. Not even being able to rapid ingress them is tough as well. Okay, moving along, we have Melee Warriors. They have a whole detachment dedicated to them. I think they're pretty good. I think they're fine. They kind of fit in the same space as like Genestealers. I generally take Genestealers more just because there's more bodies, meaning more, weapons that your opponent has to point at the unit, and the 5-up invuln is pretty strong as well. So I am generally more excited to run Genestealers over Tyranid Warriors, although I do think the Tyranid Warriors with the Winged Prime, and I'm probably just going to group the Winged Prime and the Tyranid Warriors together. I do think they do have a slot. I personally probably put them mid B tier, and of course, I'm going to put the Winged Prime with them, because if you're running Melee Warriors, in my opinion, you run them with the Winged Prime. just to give the sustained hits and a couple other buffs depending on the detachment, like Vanguard Onslaught that gives them access to advance and charge and all of the other stratagems that Vanguard Onslaught has. I like the mid B tier. I think the warrior detachment is pretty good actually, and I think if you run like 18 melee warriors and then a bunch of monsters to support and a couple of ranged warriors, I think that's good. However, it's you have to do that, or with Vanguard Onslaught, you have one of these units and you have to be very careful with your melee warriors. The problem is they trade up, and they trade up pretty well. They can kill a lot of things just because they're like blenders. I think I did release my unit spotlight on Tyranid warriors. Check that out if you haven't already, in order to see me talk about them for 30 minutes. There's a lot of good information in that video. But they're just okay. I just think they're a little bit too fragile. You have to be very careful, and you have to play in your game plan very specifically in order to allow the Tyranid warriors to function appropriately. So that's a big caveat of understanding that, yes, you can use them. However, be careful, because they do die very quickly. So honestly, no, I'll still keep them where I put them. Ranged warriors. I don't really like ranged warriors. And I know like the stratagem support in the warrior detachment, I think you run 1 or 2 3-mans, and that's about it. But besides that, I'm not really excited to run them. So I think I would run them before Neurogaunts. I think I do like them better than Parasite. No, that's not true. I think I actually like Parasite better than ranged warriors. Now, all of this kind of does shift when you get to the point where you're thinking about specific detachments. Like in the warrior detachment, like of course the Parasite of Mortrex is better than ranged warriors because of the strats and because of the 5-up invuln and because of the OC3. But in like if we're just zooming out and thinking of the data sheets itself, I think Parasite is a better data sheet than the ranged warriors. You give synapse with the ranged warriors. I think that is not something to like not notice, but also, I don't know, you can give synapse in other ways, 75 points I believe they're 75, maybe they're actually 65. But you're going to the point where you could run Hormagaunts, you could run Raveners, and because of that, I think they are, I'm going to drop them lower. I think they're better than Tervigon, but I think Barbgaunts are better than ranged warriors as well. So middle-ish top C tier for ranged Tyranid warriors. Tyrannocyte. We have somebody in the community who is building a list with 6 Tyrannocytes in Vanguard Onslaught. They have the invader keyword, so you can do stuff with them. However, I don't think they're super great, unless you're building specifically. I do think Tyranids need like a transport would be pretty cool. I'm not sure a Tyrannocyte is that. For that case, I'm going to put them below a Trygon, just above a Toxicrene, near the bottom of C tier. Yeah, I don't know. You can do some cute stuff with it, but you really have to dedicate and build in order to do those cute things. Moving on, Tyrannofex. Tyrannofex is a unit I absolutely love right now. The D6 plus 6 damage is just a phenomenal change. This unit is just, it is so good. Tyranids, you went from like not having great anti-tank to, oh my gosh, Tyranids anti-tank is really good. And it's because of the Tyrannofex. I'm going to put Tyrannofex pretty much at the top of A tier, just underneath the Neurotyrant and just above the Malaceceptor. It's a really good unit, and it's close to being S tier, but I also think you still need other things to support the Tyrannofex in order to help the Tyrannofex function. The be-all, end-all, it only has 2 shots with a gun that matters, and in order to get those 2 shots to be more efficient, you need things like an Exocrine to give the reroll 1s to hit, and you need things like a Hive Tyrant in order to advance and shoot. In my opinion, it is a very strong unit, but I'm not super excited about running it without those other things. I have ran a Crusher Stampede list with 2 Rupture Cannons and a Swarmlord instead of a Hive Tyrant, it works pretty well. And that's because as soon as they're damaged at all, they get +1 to hit, so they're always hitting on 2s. And then they're just able to kind of get where they want with the 9-inch movement. So that's pretty good. I really do like them in something like that. But most other time besides that scenario, you're going to want to run them with like a Hive Tyrant and an Exocrine in order to get just a little bit more efficiency on their gun. The Acid Spray I still think is good. I still think the Acid Spray is good. However, I just think the Rupture Cannon is so good that you want to run the Rupture Cannon before you run the Acid Spray. There is a Crusher Stampede list that I want to run where it's 2 Rupture Cannons and then 1 Acid Spray to just kind of like sit in the middle. Acid Spray deals with whatever it wants to, and the Rupture Cannon takes the flanks and kind of kills whatever else might be coming at the Tyrannofex in the middle. I think that's a pretty cool game plan, and I'm excited to run that. I actually recently bought my 3rd Tyrannofex, so I'll be building that up pretty soon and trying that on stream before too long, hopefully, you know? So Tyrannofex is great. Top of A tier, just below the Neurotyrant. I think it's a great unit, and I think the buff that GW gave it was very good. Thank you, GW. Next up, we have Tyrant Guard. The list that I've been playing in Assimilation Swarm currently only has 6 Tyrant Guard, and that's just because I own 6 Tyrant Guard. I don't own 12. Sorry. I think they're okay. And like even in Assimilation Swarm, when we're running it like that, and of course, I will admit that I need to get better at Assimilation Swarm. I will admit that. So my positioning needs to be a little bit better with the Tyrant Guard in order to make them function in a way where it's like really, really good. However, even in that, it's just kind of like, what do? They kind of are tanky, but also not super tanky. I really do like the fact that they are 4 wounds instead of 3 wounds because, like, for instance, if you're going up against Tyranids, that's actually a pretty good breaking point for them because, because it's going to take 2 Exocrine shots in order to kill 1. That's huge. However, that's all they kind of do. They just give more wounds to the Hive Tyrant. I don't know. If their offense was like just marginally better, I would be super, super excited. Now, I'm still running them in Assimilation Swarm. I think they are pretty cool in Assimilation Swarm. And if you give them fights first, then it becomes to be a very spooky brick that nobody really wants to just run up and deal with. But other than that, I'm really not excited to run that. Other than Assimilation Swarm, I don't think they're worth the points. I think they're going to be just below a Screamer Killer in C tier. And that is because I do have to give a nod to some people have done a whole bunch of success with Tyrant Guard in Assimilation Swarm. So that is something that I can't not acknowledge. So the near top of C tier, yeah, I don't know. I think some people, there's somebody who commented on a video before about if you have a character that can attach to Tyrant Guard, you should absolutely always run Tyrant Guard. I'm not sure that's necessarily true. I think you just are more careful with your characters. Don't expose your Hive Tyrant when it doesn't need to be exposed. Don't expose your Neurotyrant when it doesn't need to be exposed. Really wait to push those characters forward when it's your quote unquote go turn. And then you don't really need Tyrant Guard because if your opponent can't see your units unless it's guard with huge indirect, they're not going to be able to shoot your units. So just keep them safe, and then you don't need to spend the 75. I think it's like 80 points per 3 on Tyrant Guard. For 80 points, you can get a Deathleaper. For 80 points, you can get Raveners and Hormagaunts, and there's so many other things in the Tyranid Codex right now that I'm excited to get for 80 points. So I just think Tyrant Guard are, yeah. Moving on. Venomthropes. Venomthropes, I think, are very good in specific builds that want Venomthropes. That 60 Termagant brick invasion fleet swarm list, that wants 3-man Venomthropes for sure. Because then you get -1 to hit, you get stealth, and you get all these things. They're only 70 points, so it is pretty good. That's pretty much all I have to say about them. They're just kind of good if you need them to function in that way. I don't run them too much just because I'm not really running that swarm build. I think they are probably like in the same area as a Psychophage. I think a Psychophage is generally just a little bit better because it functions in Assimilation Swarm pretty good, and it always gives its buff to everything. Venomthropes is kind of the caveat of non-monster monster stuff, so it's not nearly as good, but I think it does function really well with the Termagant brick or like a Hormagaunt brick or something like that. So near the bottom of B tier, I do think it is better than the Carnifex. I do think Venomthropes are better than Haruspex and better than Norn Assimilator. So that's where they are. Von Ryan's Leapers. This might surprise people. I actually really like Von Ryan's Leapers. My go-to invasion fleet list, I have a 3-man, and then I have the redeploy. You string them out in like the center and screen out your opponent's infiltrates as much as you can. And then at the end, before you go, you redeploy them somewhere safer. So they're going to create like a bubble for your Genestealers and for anything else that wants to move up the board quickly, so that you can't be boxed in by a bunch of your opponent's infiltrators or scouts. I did just put them in the bottom A tier, but I don't think they're better than a Pyrovore. I think they are better than Deathleaper right now. So I'm going to shift them down so that they are bottom of the B tier, just below the Pyrovore. Yeah, I think I like them there. The fights first, infiltrate, and stealth. That's pretty good. If they had Lone Op, I think that would be just phenomenal. But that's like saying if Tyrannofex had a D6 plus 6 damage gun, they would be fantastic. So like, if they had Lone Op, that would be amazing. You can give them Lone Op and Vanguard Onslaught. If they did just a little bit more damage, I would really, really like them. But of course, they're one of those units where you're not really running them for their damage. You're kind of running them for their screening and move blocking shenanigans. So that's why they're top-ish of B tier. I do like them better than Deathleaper or Neurolictor. They serve a different role than Old One Eye, so it's hard to judge, but I'm actually quite high on Von Ryan Leapers right now. Next, moving right along. We're almost at the end, folks. Thanks for hanging with me this whole time. Hive Tyrant with wings. I think I actually rate the Hive Tyrant with wings higher than Swarmlord. Just because I think he pops up a little bit more often than Swarmlord. He has the same free strat that the Hive Tyrant does. He's pretty good. He does a good job. He can advance and charge in Vanguard Onslaught. And then the paroxysm thing with -1 attack is very, very strong, in my opinion. And then he's kind of durable. He hits kind of hard. I always run him with the Lash Whip Bone Sword. I just think that's the move. Damage 3 on a weapon like that is pretty strong. And he's just a really good support piece. So I like that Winged Hive Tyrant. I run him in Vanguard Onslaught, of course, but other than that, I'm mostly running the Walking Hive Tyrant. There was a couple Synaptic Nexus builds where I ran him with the Synaptic Control, so he's -1 damage. And then I think during those builds, I had like double Norn Emissaries. So with the Norn Emissaries, you do like Norn Emissaries on the points, guarded by Malaceptors, and then a Hive Tyrant that is able to give the -1 attack to one of whatever is committing into a Norn Emissary. So you have the Norn Emissaries that are going to be -1 to hit, with a 5-up Feel No Pain on their objective, of course, and then whatever hits them in combat is going to be -1 attack each. That's a tough nut to crack if you're able to stack all those buffs. So I really do like, in that scenario, running them like that. It's pretty sweet. Okay, last unit in the video. Again, thank you everybody for watching and hanging with me. If you like this content, if you want a little bit more of this content, please comment, like, subscribe, do all those YouTube things. We've been having a huge amount of growth recently. We really appreciate all the support. So thank you if you're already subscribed. If you're not subscribed, come on in, just do it, just do it. All right, last but not least, certainly the Zoanthropes. I like Zoanthropes. I think they did get a buff with the Neurotyrant attaching to them. I actually ran Zoanthropes for quite some time before switching over to Tyrannofexes. They're very good in Invasion Fleet. I took them to ATC. I did really well at ATC with Zoanthropes. The Overwatch in Invasion Fleet is just phenomenal. It is so good, especially if you do like sustain hits or if you do sustain hits and have them sit next to a Hive Tyrant, then you're getting sustained and lethals in an Overwatch. So every single 6 is basically just a backbreaker for your opponent. I really like the versatility of both of their profiles. The blast weapon is very useful. The blast cannon weapon is very useful as well. I honestly think it is less useful than, of course, just a rupture cannon. Just being able to just blast something, it's very strong. So because of those reasons, I think I'm putting them bottom of A tier, just above the Winged Hive Tyrant. I think they're a little bit better than the Winged Hive Tyrant. They're pretty good, you know? Unfortunately, they come into the problem where a lot of these other units, where just because the Tyrannofex exists, my stocks on them kind of are a little bit lowered. So, I don't know. I like Zoanthropes, but I'm just running Tyrannofexes and Exocrines instead of them at this point. There is a world where, like, I take out my Genestealers, and instead of Genestealers, I run a Zoanthrope brick, which I think that would be fine as well. But just right now, I'm liking a melee threat in my Genestealers as opposed to an additional shooting threat in my invasion fleet list, at least. They also function pretty well in Assimilation Swarm, because you can regrow Zoanthropes with the 4-up invuln. That's pretty tough. That's pretty good. But anyways, I think they sit right there in A tier. They're a really good unit. I just think we have a choice of so many other units that we could choose from that sometimes they get left behind. Anyways, thanks again for watching. If you disagree with any of my choices, please let me know. Do it in a nice way. These are just my opinions in this exact moment. So if I were to do this video tomorrow, there's a good chance that some of these units have shifted around. I would be interested to hear what people say in the comments. But again, thanks for hanging out. I really appreciate you watching all of this content. And I'm going to see you Wednesday. This Wednesday, in fact, coming up, I'm bringing Assimilation Swarm. So check it out. All right, everyone.